so I have an autoimmune disease, and like excessive exhaustion just kind of causes a flare up, and then I go through episodes of like intense fatigue. And then I didn't know it at the time, but I also had an iron deficiency.
Oh boy.
So I reached a point where I was just physically unable to keep going. And it was just so hard to watch everybody else thriving and, and trying not to feel less than and feel like I'm weaker, and then just like watching them get further and further and further away while I'm just like fighting with myself and fighting with my body. And
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. We're actually here in Hanover, New Hampshire. For those of you that know, this is actually Dartmouth's campus. We're here on campus to film this little video here. This is just kind of a place where they allow hikers to hang out. It's sort of like a little pool table room. A little quick pano over there for you guys. We've got a little skee ball thing over there. We've got foosball as well. But more importantly, I've got another hiker here for you guys today to kind of talk a little bit about the community aspect of being here in the AT. So without further ado, please welcome Scout.
I'm Scout. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Scout. It's a pleasure to have you here on the show. If you can introduce a little bit more about like who you are, where you're from, how you got your trail name,
for sure.
Whatever you're willing to share with the audience here.
Yeah. So my pre-trail name is Rebecca Gray. I'm from Gillette, Wyoming, which is in the middle of nowhere. Going into the trail, so like why I got on the trail, or
yeah,
okay,
sure.
Yeah. I was kind of at a crossroads and realized that the trajectory that I was kind of on for myself and the things that I'd been prioritizing in my life were definitely kind of leading me to a life that I was not going to be happy in. And I realized that I have a lot of personal growth that needed to be done and a lot of things that I needed to work on. And the trail kind of came into my life, and I had a friend who did it, and I was like, how did you do this? Like, how did you go about even starting to think about doing it? And she said, I just decided I was going to do it, and then I figured out the rest. And
there you go.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what I did, and it was like really hard and scary, but we're on the second to last state now, so.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. Yep. So it's
Yeah.
It definitely I like that aspect of it, that you can plan things kind of by the seat of your pants, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things that happen out here, of course, there are lots of variables we can't control, right?
Right.
So, a lot of last minute planning and adjusting to all the different factors at play.
Yeah, and going into it, thinking about planning for the trail, I was like, I am going to focus on the first 100 miles. My aunt actually hiked up until Franklin with me, which is 110 miles, so we planned that out, and then I was like, all right, and then I'll figure the rest out later, because it was just
sure
too much. So.
No, it totally makes sense. Yeah, lots of moving pieces.
Yeah.
But you and I were speaking a little bit earlier about the aspect of community on trail. I think both of us have had times where we've hiked kind of independently of other people.
Yeah.
And so we kind of can compare and contrast being with others versus being alone. Do you have any takes on kind of what that experience is like, hiking mostly by yourself?
That's been a huge part of my journey. Started the trail, like I said, with my aunt, and then met my now like really, really good friend Tenderfoot. I met him day 3, so we hiked together. And there's this concept on trail of a tramily, so it's your trail family. And so we developed that a few weeks into it, and it was just this group of people, and you get so close, and you really, you depend on each other for everything, and it's a lot of like communication, and it's so much fun. Like, you can get into like crazy antics, and you can like celebrate things together, and you always have someone to take your picture and someone whose picture to take, and It's a lot of fun. And then I have an autoimmune disease, and like excessive exhaustion just kind of causes a flare up, and then I go through episodes of like intense fatigue. And then I didn't know it at the time, but I also had an iron deficiency.
Oh boy.
So I reached a point where I was just physically unable to keep going. And it was just so hard to watch everybody else thriving, and, and trying not to feel less than and feel like I'm weaker, and then just like watching them get further and further and further away while I'm just like fighting with myself and fighting with my body. And but it really helped me to develop more of a sense of myself, because I was completely self-reliant. And I actually, I remember I made a video like this one day. I hiked 1 mile, and I planned on doing 12.
Okay.
And I just collapsed, and I set up my tent, and I slept for, I want to say, like 16, 17 hours, just like straight.
Right.
And then the next day I made this video, and I'm like, this is so hard. I'm like, there's no one here to help me. Like, it's scary, like you're out in the woods. And I'm like, if a bear comes by, I'm the one who has to scare it off, which is, now looking back on it, having seen 8 bears on trail, it's no big deal, but at the time it was completely overwhelming. But once I started getting past that, and then I did have that experience of coming up on a bear and being able to scare it off, and and realizing how much power I truly do have, and how much I have been allowing what other people perceive of me to impact how I live my life. Once I get kind of let go of that, then it was magical. It was this whole other beautiful experience. And so it was really cool to have that actualization, because that was a huge goal for me going into it. And then I caught back up with the tramline,
Right.
which was at first it was so cool, and I had to do a bunch of really high mileage days, and then they waited in a park for me for 6 hours, and so it was this really beautiful reunion.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, it was two months apart. And we all hugged and got back together and hiked together for a couple weeks, and it was super fun, and then had another flare up. So on my own again, but I think there really is a bigger meaning in it, and I think that it's taught me a lot about letting go and not having expectations, and appreciating things for what they are, and allowing myself to be sad, but to also know that more great things and people are coming.
Sure. No, I understand. I mean, I it's funny that as you're mentioning this, I'm reflecting back on some of my own experiences and realizing I just had that moment that you described of meeting your family after not seeing them for a while.
Right.
Getting to share those experiences, while also, when you're by yourself, not trying to let it get to your head too much, right? That you're behind them, you're not doing as well, you're not producing as many miles per day as you need to.
Right.
Not letting that determine your perspective on the experience itself and how it's happening. I think those are two components, both the extreme joy, right?
Yeah.
Being with other people and getting to share that experience, but also being more self-reliant while being on your own, and not letting sort of other definition of what that progress means get to you. So.
And I think, sorry to interrupt but
please.
A big, huge one for me was I didn't realize how much my self-worth relied on consistent validation from other people.
Oh, I see.
Until I genuinely didn't have that as an option.
I see.
Being literally alone in the woods and not having a close friend around, or even, I think I used romantic relationships for a long time. Anytime I was feeling bad about myself, I was I'm gonna find a guy to go out with, and so he can tell me I'm attractive, and and then sitting with myself and being no, I'm intrinsically worthy. And I have value that I can analyze myself, and I can validate myself without without other people,
Sure.
which is, yeah, huge.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And I think that's maybe a skill set that people, if you're sitting at home watching this, that's something that the trail in and of itself as an experience can help people to build,
yeah.
regardless of where you are in life. That
Right.
knowledge that it isn't necessarily your worth, I think, as you said, better than I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your worth isn't dependent on what others believe about
Mm-hmm.
you and your abilities to perform.
Mm-hmm.
It's something you can define for yourself.
Right.
Um, Thanks for sharing that. I think
Oh my
it's
gosh,
something you don't hear
yeah.
from people too often about the.
Yeah, it's hard because it's something we don't talk about much, because it's a very, very tricky, complicated, sometimes gross thing to analyze the hard parts of yourself. Yeah.
Of course, of course. Do you think, and as this is kind of a wrap-up question for the video here, do you sort of think that if you go back to the self before you started the trail, do you think that you may have been able to predict some of the ways that you've reacted to situations you've been in, or do you think you've maybe uncovered a new way that you've started to look at?
I think I thought that I would. Well, it's a tough one. I don't know. I think I thought that I wouldn't handle it as well as I did in a lot of situations. I think previous to the trail, I had kind of a downward spiral loop where I would just kind of like, I'd feel bad about something and then I would just expand on that and be like, well, I also feel horrible about this. And then eventually it reaches the apex of like, I'm a terrible person and I'm unworthy.
Sure.
And I think that's something interesting about the trail is it doesn't allow you to do that because you reach a point where you're literally surviving. Like it's like, okay, well, I can feel this way, I can be upset, but I have to get to, I have to hike enough that I can, get more food. I have to make sure that I have water.
Right.
And so it kind of gives you a lot of perspective about what's important and how we make things seem worse than they are.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right. But that because, and if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that when you're on trail, in spite of your mind's ability to take these situations and kind of blow them up to be worse than they might actually be, you still have to work through it because you have to get food the next day.
Right.
You got to go into town.
Yeah,
you gotta,
like what's your other option? There isn't.
Right, exactly.
Like you just have to do it.
Right.
You just have to figure out how to do it.
Exactly. To make it so. That's fantastic. Thanks again for sharing all of that.
Oh, thank you. This is
The
so
last
fun.
and final question that I usually ask people on here is if you have any notes or comments for people sitting at home that are on the fringe of thinking about doing a Thru-Hike.
I think when I finally decided to do it, it was like genuine bliss. Like I was just so like I reached a moment where I was like, I can do this. Like I'm in a position in my life where like I'm gonna have to make sacrifices for it, but it's going to be worth it. And I think like if I could go back and like talk to myself like right before I was trying to decide to do the trail, I think it's like prepare as much as you can, but know that your best is good enough, and that even if you don't feel like you're ready, you are capable of becoming a person who can do it. You have, a lot of potential, and you're capable of a lot more than you think you are, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Scout, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And all of us, wish you the best of luck with the rest of the journey. I know we'll see each other, but I'm sure they out there want to hear more about how you're doing too. So, thank you guys for joining us on today's episode, and we'll see you next time on For Our Far Travel.